The chief surgeon never used her name. He didn't forget it. He just didn't think it mattered. To him, she was an object that moved when told, spoke only when spoken to, and disappeared when inconvenient. A pair of hands, a body in scrubs, a quiet presence that blended into the background of the emergency room like a piece of equipment no one remembered ordering. She stood just inside the trauma bay, hands clasped in front of her, weight balanced carefully on the balls of her feet. Not rigid, not relaxed, somewhere in between, the posture of someone who had learned how to stay ready without drawing attention. "Why are you standing there?" Dr. Evan Halverson snapped, eyes never leaving the open chest cavity in front of him. "If you're not assisting, you're in the way." Mara Klein flinched almost imperceptibly. "I'm sorry," she said, already stepping backward. Her voice was soft but clear. No tremor, no defensiveness, just compliance. One of the surgical residents snorted. Another shook his head, smirking behind his mask. Halverson finally glanced at her. His gaze slid over her face like it was already bored. "Do I need to explain initiative to you, or are you just naturally slow?" "No, doctor," she said. "Then stop hovering." "Yes, doctor." She moved to the wall, back straight, eyes lowered, invisible again. No one noticed the way her gaze continued to track the room, the monitors, the surgeon's hands, the way the patient's blood pressure dipped and recovered in uneven waves. No one noticed the way her jaw tightened for half a second when Halverson barked at a tech for handing him the wrong instrument, an instrument he'd asked for incorrectly. And no one noticed the way her fingers flexed once, slowly, as if testing the memory of something they hadn't used in a long time. The ER was loud tonight. Sirens outside, shouting inside, metal clattering against steel trays, someone crying in the hallway. Chaos. Mara thrived in chaos. She just didn't let anyone see it. "Clamp!" Halverson snapped. She stepped forward instantly, placing the instrument in his hand before the resident beside her even moved. Halverson paused, looked at the clamp, then at her. For a moment, just a moment, something like irritation crossed his face. Not because she'd done it wrong, because she'd done it right. "Don't anticipate," he said sharply. "Wait to be told, I understand," she said. She stepped back again. The patient stabilized. Barely. Halverson peeled off his gloves with a sharp tug and tossed them into the bin like an exclamation point. "Clean this up, and next time, nurse, don't think, just follow." "Yes, doctor." As he left the bay, the residents exchanged looks. One of them leaned close to another and whispered, loud enough to be heard, "She's like a ghost." "You think she even feels anything?" Mara didn't react, but inside, something old shifted. Not anger. Memory. By the end of her first month in the ER, everyone had an opinion about Mara Klein. None of them were generous. "She's useless," one tech said while restocking gloves. "Never pushes back, never speaks up. That's because she's scared," a resident replied. "You can see it in her eyes." Another laughed. "Nah, she's just weak." Mara passed them in the hallway, carrying a stack of charts. She didn't slow down, didn't speed up, didn't look at them. She had learned a long time ago that invisibility was safer than confrontation. The break room television murmured softly in the background, some late-night talk show no one was watching. Mara sat alone at the small table by the wall, eating her dinner from a plastic container. Plain chicken, white rice, no sauce. She ate slowly, methodically. Each bite chewed the same number of times. A nurse from pediatrics glanced at her tray and frowned. "You always eat that?" Mara looked up. "Yes. Every shift? Yes." "Don't you get bored?" Mara considered the question. "No." The nurse shrugged. "Suit yourself." When the room emptied again, Mara finished her meal and wiped the container clean before sealing it. No waste, no smell. She placed it carefully in her bag. Predictable food, predictable routine, control. Halverson ensured she worked the worst shifts. Overnight rotations that blurred into early mornings. Double shifts with minimal rest. He never said why. He didn't need to. When she asked once, quietly, if she could rotate into trauma procedures for additional training, he laughed. "You don't have the temperament," he said. "You freeze." "I don't freeze," she said. He leaned forward, voice dropping. "You flinch." She didn't correct him. After that, she stopped asking. During one particularly brutal night, a drunk patient grabbed her wrist hard enough to leave bruises. "Hey," a resident said, watching with mild interest. "You okay?" "Yes," Mara said, gently prying the man's fingers loose with practiced ease. The resident raised an eyebrow. "Huh." Mara cleaned the room afterward. Blood, vomit, broken glass. She scrubbed until the stainless steel shone. When she finally sat down in the locker room alone, she stared at her hands. They were steady. They were always steady. The flashbacks didn't come all at once. They slipped in through cracks. The smell of cauterized flesh when a surgical tool overheated. The rhythmic beep of a monitor that fell out of sync. The weight of a body being lifted too late. Sometimes it was sound, the sharp pop of something rupturing, the muffled thud of impact. Once, during a mass casualty drill, someone dropped a metal tray behind her. Mara turned instantly, body already shifting, shoulders squared, eyes scanning. For half a second, she wasn't in the ER. She was somewhere darker, hotter, louder. Then the moment passed. "Relax," a nurse laughed. "It's just a drill," Mara nodded. Of course. She forced herself to breathe through her nose, slow, controlled. In the supply closet later, she stood with her forehead resting against the cool metal shelf, eyes closed. She didn't see the past. She felt it, the weight of command, the responsibility, the cost of mistakes. She had buried that part of herself carefully, layer by layer, by silence on top of silence. No one here needed to know who she had been. No one here needed that version of her. She told herself that every day. The night it happened started like any other. Rain lashed the windows. Sirens echoed endlessly from the highway. The ER buzzed with that familiar edge, like the building itself was holding its breath. Mara was restocking IV kits when the trauma call came in. Incoming. Multi-vehicle collision. Bus involved. Possible fire. Multiple critical. Everything snapped into motion. Halverson took command immediately, barking orders, assigning roles. He barely glanced at Mara. "You," he said, pointing without looking. "Prep Bay 3, then stay out of the way." "Yes, doctor." The first patient arrived unconscious, chest crushed from the steering wheel, blood pressure unstable, oxygen saturation dropping. Mara's eyes flicked to the monitor, then to the bruising pattern, then to the man's breathing. Something didn't align. They rushed him into Bay 3. Halverson ordered imaging, but the CT scanner flickered. Power instability from the crash site. "Forget it," Halverson said. "We open him here." Mara stepped closer. Her heart began to pound, not with fear, but with recognition. She had seen this before. "Doctor," she said carefully, keeping her voice low. "His vitals suggest tension pneumothorax. If we decompress first," Halverson turned so fast his shoulder clipped her arm. "I didn't ask," he snapped. "If we don't, his lungs." That was when his hand shot out. Fingers tangled in her hair, wrenching her head backward. The pain was sharp. Immediate. The room froze. "I said shut up," Halverson hissed. "Get out." For a heartbeat, Mara didn't move, not because she was afraid, because something inside her had gone very, very still. Hands on her head, a line had been crossed. Slowly, deliberately, she reached up and removed his fingers from her hair. "I'm leaving the room," she said. Her voice was flat, controlled. She stepped back. Behind her, the patient's monitor screamed, and everything began to unravel. The alarm didn't just sound. It screamed. A shrill, relentless tone that cut through the ER like a blade, forcing every head to turn toward Trauma Bay 3. The monitor flashed red, oxygen saturation dropping fast, heart rate spiking, then stuttering. "Why is he desatting?" a resident shouted. Halverson was already scrubbing in again, irritation radiating off him like heat. "He's bleeding internally. We knew that." "No," another resident said, panic creeping into his voice. "This isn't hemorrhagic. Quiet," Halverson snapped. "Chest tube. Now." Mara stood just outside the bay. She hadn't left yet. Her feet were planted. Her hands were clenched at her sides. Her pulse was loud in her ears, but her mind was eerily clear. She watched Halverson fumble. Watched him hesitate, just a fraction too long, before choosing the wrong insertion point. Watched the man's chest rise unevenly, air trapped where it shouldn't be. She knew exactly what was happening, and she knew exactly how fast it would kill him. "Doctor," she said again, louder this time. "We need immediate needle decompression. He's crashing." Halverson didn't even look at her. "I said I've got it," he barked. "Security. Why is she still here? The patient convulsed. Heart rate plummeted. Code blue, someone shouted. The room exploded into motion, but it was sloppy now, reactive. Too late. Halverson's hands shook as he repositioned the tube. Mara felt something snap inside her. Not rage, decision. She stepped forward. Clear, she said. No one had told her to. Her voice cut through the noise. Calm, level, unmistakably certain. Several people froze without realizing why. She took the needle from the tray, fingers already adjusting angle and depth before her conscious mind caught up. Muscle memory took over. Years old. Buried deep. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She inserted the needle precisely where it needed to go. There was a hiss. Air escaped violently like a held breath finally released. The patient's chest dropped. The monitor stabilized. A pulse returned. For a moment, the only sound in the room was breathing. Not the patient's, everyone else's. Halverson stared at the monitor, then at Mara, disbelief twisting his face. What did you just do? Mara withdrew the needle, hands steady. I decompressed the lung. You had no authority. If I hadn't, she said quietly, he would be dead. Silence crashed down. Then Halverson exploded. Get her out of here, he shouted. Now! She assaulted me and interfered with a surgical procedure. Security appeared almost immediately, drawn by the raised voices. One guard reached for Mara's arm. She didn't pull away. She didn't argue. She just looked once more at the patient, stable, alive. That was enough. As they escorted her toward the exit, the whispers started. Did you see that? How did she know? Who does she think she is? Mara kept walking. Her face was blank. Inside, everything was locked down. They stopped her near the lobby doors. Badge, the guard said. She unclipped it and handed it over without a word. You're suspended pending investigation, he added, not unkindly. You can collect your things later. Yes, she said. The automatic doors slid open. Cold air rushed in. And then, hold. The word carried weight, not shouted, not whispered, commanded. Boots hit the floor behind her, heavy, purposeful. Mara turned. 3 men in uniform stood just inside the entrance. Military. Their presence was wrong for this place. Too controlled, too sharp. The one in front stepped forward, eyes already locked on her. Is Mara Klein present? Every conversation in the lobby died. Mara straightened. Yes, she said. The man stopped in front of her and snapped to attention. So are you, he said. Confusion rippled through the room. Captain Mara Klein, the man continued, voice ringing clear. You are requested immediately. Someone dropped a clipboard. Halverson had followed them out. What is this? He demanded. She's under investigation. The man turned slowly. His rank insignia silenced the room. Doctor, he said evenly, you put your hands on one of ours. The air went thin. Mara closed her eyes for half a second, not in relief, in resignation. No one moved. The automatic doors hissed softly as they slid closed behind the men in uniform, sealing the ER lobby into something that no longer felt like a hospital. The air changed. The noise level dropped. Even the monitors seemed quieter, as if the building itself understood that something larger than routine chaos had just arrived. Halverson stood rigid, jaw clenched, trying to reassert gravity. This is a civilian hospital, he said. You can't just... The colonel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Doctor, he said, step back. There was a difference between authority and power. Everyone in the room felt it immediately. Halverson hesitated just long enough for it to register. Then he stepped back. The colonel turned to Mara. Captain, he said, softer now. We've been trying to reach you since 1900 hours. Mara met his eyes. I was on shift, she said. A flicker of something passed over his face. Respect, concern, something personal. I see that. He gestured toward the trauma bays. We were notified of an incident involving physical assault and unauthorized removal from duty. Halverson bristled. She assaulted me. The colonel turned slowly. You grabbed her by the hair, he said. Not a question. Halverson opened his mouth. Closed it. That is assault, the colonel continued. And you did it to an active duty officer operating under federal protective status. The words landed like dropped glass. A resident whispered, active duty? Another murmured, officer? Mara stood perfectly still. Her hands were clasped behind her back now. Not defensive, formal. Halverson's voice cracked. "She's a nurse." "Yes," the colonel said. "She is." He reached into his pocket and removed a folded document, extending it to hospital administration, who had finally arrived, pale and flustered. "Captain Mara Klein," he read aloud, "United States Army Medical Corps, trauma surgeon, former lead medical officer, Joint Special Operations Task Group Sierra A Beat. Call sign Atlas." The name rippled through the room like a shockwave. One of the older attendings went visibly still. "No," he said quietly. "That's not possible." The colonel looked at him. "You know the call sign?" The attending swallowed. "Everyone knows Atlas." Mara felt the weight of the room shift. Eyes were on her now, not dismissive, not mocking, trying to understand. The colonel continued, voice steady, factual, merciless. Captain Klein completed 4 combat deployments. She coordinated battlefield triage under fire. She has personally stabilized over 200 critically wounded personnel in hostile environments with limited equipment. Halverson's face drained of color. She was awarded the Silver Star for medical intervention under direct enemy fire, the colonel went on, and the Distinguished Service Cross for actions taken during a mass casualty incident that saved 37 lives. Silence pressed in. Mara felt something tighten in her chest. She had never liked hearing it spoken out loud. The colonel lowered the paper. "She took a civilian nursing position under a protected reintegration program," he said, "which you violated." Halverson finally found his voice. "Why wasn't I told? You weren't cleared," the colonel replied. Mara exhaled slowly. The hospital administrator cleared her throat, voice trembling. "Captain, why didn't you say anything?" Mara considered the question. "Because I wasn't asked," she said. The answer landed harder than any accusation. She turned to Halverson. "You were wrong," she said. "Calm, controlled, no venom. About the patient, about me, about what happens when you don't listen." Halverson looked at her now, not down at her, not past her, at her. He stopped, swallowed. "You had no right to." "I had every right," she said quietly. "I just didn't need to prove it." The colonel stepped forward again. "Dr. Halverson," he said, "you are under formal review for misconduct, patient endangerment, and assault of a federal officer." Security shifted. Halverson's shoulders sagged. The power was gone. Mara watched it happen with a strange detachment. This wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't revenge. It was correction. The colonel turned back to her. "Captain," he said, "you are requested to return with us." She nodded once, then she surprised everyone. "No," she said. The word was gentle. Final. The colonel blinked. "No, I'm done running," Mara said. "But I'm also done pretending." The ER held its breath. The ER did not return to normal. Not after that. People moved again. Machines beeped. Orders were given. But everything felt off-center, like a building after an earthquake, still standing, but no longer trusting its own foundations. Mara remained where she was, as the colonel spoke quietly with hospital administration. She wasn't listening closely. She didn't need to. The outcome had already set itself in motion. Halverson sat in a chair near the wall, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. No one spoke to him. No one defended him. The residents who had once orbited him now avoided his gaze entirely. For the first time since she'd arrived at this hospital, Mara felt eyes on her that weren't searching for weakness. They were searching for understanding. A young nurse she barely recognized stood frozen near the nurse's station, staring at her with something close to awe. A tech mouthed the word sorry when Mara glanced his way. She felt none of it land. The colonel approached her again. "Captain," he said, lowering his voice, "you don't have to do this here." "I know," Mara replied. "You were pulled for your own safety." Reintegration was supposed to be quiet. It was, she said, until it wasn't. He studied her for a moment. "You saved a man's life tonight." "Yes, and you were assaulted for it." "Yes." "You don't want accountability?" Mara looked past him, toward the trauma bay where the patient now rested, alive, because someone had been willing to act. "I want it done right," she said. The colonel nodded once. Hospital administration reconvened in a small conference room off the ER. Fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. The space felt too small for the gravity of what was happening. Halverson sat across from Mara. He looked smaller here. Not physically. Something else had been stripped away. The chief medical officer cleared his throat. "Dr. Halverson, we are placing you on immediate administrative leave pending investigation." Halverson nodded faintly. "I understand. You will surrender your credentials for the duration." "I understand." The CMO turned to Mara. "Captain Klein, we owe you an apology." Mara didn't respond. Halverson finally looked up at her. "You should have said something," he muttered. She met his eyes calmly. "You should have listened. The words weren't sharp. They didn't need to be. I've been doing this for 20 years, he said, desperation creeping in. You don't get to hurt people because you're tired, she said, or because you're in charge." The room went still. "You grabbed my hair," she continued. "You tried to silence me, and because of that, a patient almost died." Halverson looked away. "I won't pretend I handled it perfectly," Mara said, "but I handled it when it mattered." She stood. "I don't want your job," she added, "and I don't want your punishment. I want you to remember this the next time someone quieter than you speaks up." She turned to the administrators. "I'm resigning," she said. Gasps rippled through the room. The colonel's head snapped up. "Mara, I finished what I came here to do," she said. They stood outside the hospital as dawn broke. Rain had washed the night clean. The city looked softer in the early light. The colonel handed her a folded set of papers. "Full reinstatement," he said. "Command wants you back. Trauma advisory. Training oversight. You'd outrank most of the people in the room." Mara took the papers. Didn't open them. "I don't want to go back to war," she said. He nodded slowly. "Then don't. There are people here who need what I know," she continued, "and they don't need a rank to listen." The colonel smiled faintly. "You always did choose the hard road." She handed the papers back. "Help me build something," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. 6 months later, the ER sounded different. Not quieter, just steadier. The alarms still rang. Stretchers still rolled in at impossible hours. People still made mistakes under pressure. But the sharp edge, the one that had turned stress into cruelty, was gone. Mara Klein stood just inside Trauma Bay 3, same place she had stood on her first night. Hands relaxed at her sides now, not folded, not hidden. A young nurse hovered near the wall, eyes darting between the patient and the senior resident running the code. She looked terrified, frozen in that awful space between knowing something was wrong and not believing she had the right to say it. Mara noticed immediately. "What do you see?" she asked. The nurse swallowed. I think the patient's chest expansion is asymmetric." The resident hesitated. Mara nodded once. "Good catch. Say it out loud." The nurse took a breath. "Possible tension, pneumothorax." The room shifted. The resident nodded. "Agreed. Prep for decompression. No yelling, no humiliation, no fear." The procedure went smoothly. The patient stabilized. Afterward, the nurse exhaled shakily. "Thank you." Mara met her eyes. "You were right. Don't wait next time." She moved on. Mara no longer wore a standard nurse badge. Her role was different now. Clinical mentor, trauma response lead, training coordinator. No rank, no medals on display, just experience quietly applied. People listened to her, not because they were afraid, because she was right. In the break room, the food was still simple: chicken, rice. But now, sometimes, there was seasoning. A tech passed her one night and said, "You're the calmest person I've ever worked with." Mara smiled slightly. "I've had practice." She still had bad days, still woke sometimes with her heart racing, the past clawing at the edges of sleep. But she didn't run from it anymore. She taught. She stayed, and when someone snapped their fingers at a nurse one evening, Mara turned. "Don't do that," she said quietly. The man froze. "I'm sorry," he said. Mara nodded. "Good." She returned to her work. In Trauma Bay 3, the monitors beeped steadily, and for the first time, the quiet nurse was no longer invisible. She never had been. What would you have done if you were in that ER? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story hit you, like and subscribe for more cinematic justice stories. New long-form uploads every week.